Welcome to be a Mensch, our weekly class on Pirkei Avot, ethics of our fathers. And we are nearing the end of chapter 2 of ethics of our fathers. And we are in Mishnah 13, Mishnah Yud Gimel. For those of you that have been here on a weekly basis, you know that we have been studying. So of course, it's been teaching us ethics and moral teachings throughout the Talmud from different rabbis, different selections throughout the Talmud, different rabbis from the Talmudic era, from the Mishnaic era. And more recently, right around Tisha B'Av, which was very appropriate, we started to discuss Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and his 5 students. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was famously the rabbi who led the Jewish people through the Second Temple destruction era. And he was famously the one, you may be familiar with the story, where he sneaks out pretending to be dead, and he negotiates with Vespasian for the 3 things that he asks for: Yavne v'chachameha, the house of Rabbi Gamliel, and healing for Rabbi Tzadok. Those were 3 crucial things for the Jewish people to have: the Sanhedrin, the leaders of the Jewish people, etc. For them to have as they go into exile. Those were crucial things for them to be able to have with them. Anyway, so that's one of his famous stories. And the Mishnah in Pirkei told us a couple of weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago, he had 5 students. And the Mishnah continues, Heim Amru Shlosha Dvarim, that they said 3 things. Each of these 5 rabbis shared with us 3 things. This was after discussing them at length and discussing the different qualities that each one of them possessed, and how Rabbi Yochanan praised each of them for their qualities that they brought to the table, etc. So we did 3 lessons from Rabbi Eliezer. May the honor of your friend be like your own honor. Don't be quick to get angry, and return. Do teshuvah one day before you die. We learned 3 lessons from Rabbi Yoshua, that there are 3 things that destroy a person, eradicate a person in this world, and they are an evil eye, an evil inclination, and hatred of other people. We learned 3 lessons last week from Rabbi Yossi, which is that your friend's property, your friend's money should be as dear to you, and you should be as careful with it as you are with your own. Always be prepared, always work hard, always prepare yourself properly to learn Torah, because it is not just an inheritance for you, it's something you need to earn, and all of your deeds should be for the sake of heaven. And this week, we arrive at the 4th student of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. His 4th student was a man by the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Nisanel. Rabbi Shimon, the son of Nisanel, and he shares with us 3 things. And as with always in Pirkei Avos, we are going to see that these 3 things are directly related to who Rabbi Shimon was as a person, and they are going to be lessons that we can learn in our own lives, ethical and moral ways that we can live, literally, as the title of this morning's class is, to be a Mensch. So Arnold, you want to get us started by reading for us, what are the 3 things here? I'll zoom in for you. What are the 3 things that Rabbi Shimon teaches us? Go for it.
Okay, Rabbi Shimon says, be very careful about saying Kriyat Shema and davening at the proper time. When you daven, do not make your davening something you do out of habit, but a heartfelt plea and a request for mercy before Hashem, who is merciful and kind. As it says in Sefer Yoel, Hashem is gracious and merciful. He is slow to anger, has much kindness, and rejects bad decrees. Do not consider yourself to be a rasha, which can cause depression or apathy.
Thank you, Arnold. So we have 3 tips from Rabbi Shimon. Number 1, when you daven, be very careful about saying Kriya Shema and davening at the proper time. There's a mitzvah in the Torah to say Shema every morning and every evening, and to daven, of course. The biblical commandment is not necessarily to daven 3 times a day. That comes from the men of the Great Assembly. But to pray, to daven, right? These are mitzvahs. Says Rabbi Shimon, be careful with those. Number 2, he says, in that davening, be careful that it should not become a burden. It should not become something that you do out of habit. Rather, it should be something that you're begging and you're pleading and you're asking Hashem with your heart. It should be heartfelt. Your prayer should be heartfelt. And number 3, never view yourself as a rasha, as a wicked person. I guess we could translate it as never giving up hope. We're going to unpack each of these 3 lessons. But the major question number 1 becomes, we already know, in other words, those attending here this morning, the class, you all know this already, that Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers, is supposed to be a book on what's called Milei de Chasadusa. In other words, beyond the letter of the law. No mitzvahs are discussed in Pirkei Avot. It's supposed to be all these extra things that you go the extra mile. Be extra careful in the way you treat other people. Be extra careful in the way you serve Hashem, etc. It's supposed to be things that are beyond the letter of the law. Here, the first thing that Rabbi Shimon shares with us is, be careful about davening and Shema and reading the Shema. Those are both biblical mitzvahs. Why would that be beyond the letter of the law? So as it turns out, it is directly related to who Rabbi Shimon was as a person. Steve, you have the book in front of you? We're on page 75. You want to read for us a little bit about who Rabbi Shimon ben Nisanel was? Steve, with us? You're muted. Steve? You unmuted yourself and I muted you back.
That's not good.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Now.
Go ahead.
Oh, I keep hitting the space bar and it goes off and then goes back on again.
Yeah, probably a little bit my fault because I keep pressing on my end too. Okay, go ahead.
I was wondering why I turn it on and it turn off.
It's like a little tug of war for the microphone. Yeah, go ahead.
Rabbi Shimon ben Nisanel was one of the Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai's 5 great students. He was versed in the secret mystical parts of the Torah, Kabbalah, to the level of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, the author of the Zohar. Rabbi Shimon learned so diligently that he was the halakhic status of Torato Mato. Okay. Torah was his only pursuit. Therefore, he was not only obligated to interrupt his learning to daven each day and stopped only to recite Kriyat Shema. Rabban Gamaliel Hazaken's daughter married a man named Shimon ben Nisanel, who was also a Kohen, but different details seem to indicate that he was another man who happened to bear the same name.
Okay, keep going for us, please, and behind the quote.
Okay, behind the quote, Rabbi Shimon's great quality was his fear of sin. In this Mishnah, he teaches us how to acquire this noble trait by concentrating during the Kriyat Shema and davening. Thinking about Hashem's greatness naturally leads to Yirat Shamayim.
Which means fear of heaven. Okay, right. Thank you, Steve. So at first glance, it seems that Rabbi Shimon is teaching us that we should be careful about something which we're actually obligated to do according to the Torah, as we mentioned, right? To read Shema and to daven, these are mitzvahs that we're obligated to do according to the Torah. So what's going on here? So there is a famous Talmudic discussion, a sugya, if you will, that the rabbis argue about what to do in a situation where someone is occupied with one mitzvah and another mitzvah comes his way, right? So let's say you're busy, I don't know, honoring your parents, and then all of a sudden you have an opportunity to help another human being. Let's say you're busy shaking the lulav and etrog, and all of a sudden you hear about a wedding where they need people to honor the bride, or whatever it is, right? Whatever it may be. Different mitzvahs kind of conflicting with each other. And it's really kind of a sugya. It's a discussion that kind of threads its way through the entire Talmud, and it's discussed over and over again. In general, we do have a rule which is called kol ha'osek b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah, that if somebody is occupied with one mitzvah, he is exempt from another mitzvah. However, there are lots of qualifications for that. Obviously, if one of the mitzvahs can be done at any time, let's take our example of shaking the lulav and honoring a bride. Let's say you can shake a lulav at any time over a 5-6 hour period, right? Because you can do it the whole morning hours, really, you can do it all the way till sunset. But let's say you want to do it properly in the morning hours. And this wedding is happening, I don't know, specifically at exactly 11 a.m. And that's when you have an opportunity to go honor the bride. So you could do that and go do the lulav afterwards. And they're not really conflicting each other, right? In any event, then you have a different conflict, which is somebody who learns Torah, he's in the middle of learning Torah. Right now, we're all sitting in a class. And while we're sitting in the middle of this class, all of a sudden an opportunity to do a mitzvah presents itself. So the only way to become exempt from doing a mitzvah while you're studying Torah is only if you're studying Torah the entire day. The term, the Talmudic term for this is called someone who is Torato uminato, which means someone who Torah is his occupation. He studies Torah so diligently that there's never a single moment in the day when he's not studying Torah, right? Think of some of these rabbis in the Talmud. Think of some of these Kolo rabbis that you hear about. They spend their entire day studying Torah. technically, and before you actually act on this, I would advise you to contact your local Orthodox rabbi. But technically, somebody who has reached such a stage, I'll mention that it's few and far between. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai was one of the ones that was famous for this. Rabbi Shimon ben Nesanel clearly was the same. Somebody who has attained this status becomes exempt from reading the Shema and from davening. Why? Because those are time-oriented mitzvot. And he is learning the entire day. Because he's learning the entire day, therefore he becomes exempt from reading the Shema. Very interesting. So to Rabbi Shimon ben Nesanel, this mitzvah became beyond the letter of the law. For him to interrupt his Torah study and instead read Shema was something he was not required to do. But Rabbi Shimon ben Nesanel advises that you should do it. If you remember, again, like 5-6 weeks ago, when we were learning about these 5 students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai praised each of them with like a one-liner. I think Rabbi Yossi became Asher Yoladato, blessed is he who bore him. Someone else was he was like a sieve he's like a plastered cistern that he receives all of his Torah teaching, but he doesn't let any of it seep away and disappear, etc., etc. What was Rabbi Shimon's praise? Rabbi Shimon's praise was that he was Yirei Chet. He was God-fearing. He had this quality, like you read, Steve, of Yirat Shamayim, fear of heaven. What are we getting at here? Rabbi Shimon says, if you want to attain this quality, then you need to make sure your davening and your Kriyat Shema is an extremely important part of your day. So he starts off by telling us, even if you've attained the status of Torah where you're technically absolved from it, you make sure you do it. Davening is an important part of our serving our Creator. Reading the Shema is an important part of attaining a level of fear of heaven, and recognizing that at every single moment the burden of Hashem, the mastery of Hashem is upon us. And that's why it's so important to do them every single day. And this leads directly into his next teaching. What was teaching number 2 from Rabbi Shimon? When you daven, make sure your daven doesn't become a habit or a burden or something where you're just saying words but you don't understand what you're saying. For anybody who davens every single morning, and I know that a few of you on this class this morning do, you know that it can easily become, whether it's in Hebrew, whether it's in English, it doesn't make a difference. You saying the same thing every single day, those words could start to be less inspiring to you. They can start to be something that it doesn't move you as much. Therefore, it's important for us to take a moment every morning before davening, whether it's put yourself in the right frame of mind, whether it's learn some Chassidus, find something to meditate on, that you're not just saying the same words, but you're finding new meaning in those words. We don't use other words every morning during davening. Of course, you can use your own words in your own mind to talk to yourself. But in those same words, we can find layers upon layers upon layers of meaning. That's one of the primary reasons why Chassidim, despite the fact that davening is supposed to be one of the first things in the morning, even before you study Torah, we take some time to study Chassidus, the deeper dimension of Torah, before davening, in order to make sure that our davening actually has an effect on us. It's actually something meaningful. It's not rote, and it's not boring, and it's not burdensome. Okay. And number 3, says Rabbi Shimon, you shouldn't be a rasha in your own eyes. You should not be an evil person. Don't look at yourself as a wicked person. This is a very, very interesting statement. Stephanie, you're driving. Can you read for us? Or you'd rather not? You'd rather not. There you go. Okay. I wasn't sure if you're driving or if you had parked already. Okay. So, Arnold, you're up again. Arnold? Okay. Steve, I guess it's you. I muted you again. Go for it. So, we are going to learn about some of the righteous tricks. The Talmud tells us that the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is often called the trickster. Why? Because he clothes himself in this kind of, I'm on your side, and I'm trying to give you tips as to how you can be righteous. And one of the things that the Yetzer Hara does, he tells us, as Steve will read for us in just a moment here in the Spark section, he tells us, you should look at yourself as wicked. Doesn't the Torah want you to view yourself as humble? Isn't ego the worst thing ever? Right? So says the Mishnah, that tells us Rabbi Shimon, yes, you should be humble, but be very careful not to allow your pursuit of humbleness or humility. Don't allow that to lead you astray, to start becoming depressed, etc. Steve, you want to read for us? Go for it.
Yes, righteous tricks. One of the tactics of the Yetzer Hara uses to interfere with your service of Hashem is to convince you that you are a Rasha. This can lead to one of the more of the following scenarios: depression, which prevents serving Hashem with joy; indifference to your low status; thoughts like, if I'm already a Rasha, what does that matter if I do another misdeed? Don't fall for the tricks of the Yetzer Hara. Even when you make mistakes, remember that Hashem forgives those who sincerely regret their sins and are determined not to do them again. Move on and return to being the great Jew that you truly are.
Thank you, Steve. Last week, I think it was last week, hold on. Last week we spoke about respecting other people, that the property of other people should be as dear to you as your own property. And one of the things that we addressed was the balance of how to respect other people while at the same time respecting yourself. I think one of our students last week asked, how can we, gain a respect for ourselves? That we shouldn't let ourselves be trampled on by other people, etc. We spent some time talking about that. And I didn't think about this last week. I hadn't prepared this Mishnah yet. But look at this. Rabbi Shimon tells us that it's also important to have an ounce of self-respect. Don't let even the Yetzer Hara, don't let him trample all over you. Certainly, this is a fine line to walk. We shouldn't become egotistical. But we also have to make sure that we don't beat ourselves up so much that in our own eyes we become depressed. Oh, I'm so terrible. I'm always doing negative things. As a matter of fact, there are three perspectives as to how to look at this section of the Mishnah. Rabbi Ovadia Bartanura, who's one of the classic commentaries on the Mishnah, shares here three perspectives as to how to look at this last statement of Rabbi Shimon. Don't consider yourself a Rasha in your eyes. Don't be evil. Do not be evil in your own eyes. The first thing he says, this is very powerful. He says, a person should not do anything now that you'll blame yourself for later. He says, think about you calling yourself a Rasha later. Think now, as you're having a challenge, whether you should or shouldn't do the right thing, or should or shouldn't do the wrong thing for that matter. Think now, will this cause me to look at myself as a Rasha later? Will this cause me later to look back at myself and say, oh, you're such a terrible person? And if it will, don't do it now. That's one way of looking at it. Number two, he says, a person should, this is the perspective we shared already, this is from the Rambam based on Maimonides. A person should not consider himself to be evil because such an identity is a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you start to look at yourself as evil, then you start to become depressed, and then you don't serve Hashem, and then indeed you become evil. In other words, if you look at yourself as a Rasha, if you look at yourself as I am somebody who doesn't do the will of Hashem, then that leads you to adopt that attitude. When we take a certain perspective, that becomes our reality. Our thoughts are a very dangerous and very powerful place. They're very dangerous because they can lead us astray if we're thinking negative thoughts about ourselves. But at the same time, it is a very powerful place. If we look at ourselves, what was that line they ended off with? Move on and return to being the great Jew that you truly are. If we take that perspective, if we look at ourselves as a neshama, as a part of Hashem, that we constantly, even if we sin, even if we slip up, even if we make mistakes, we're constantly connected to Hashem, then that's the greatest kind of stab in the back to the Yetzer Hara, to the evil inclination. Why? Because he wants you to do something negative and then beat yourself up over it and continue to slip and slide down that vicious cycle. And you say to him, no. Yes, I slipped up. Yes, I listened to you once, but I'm not going to allow that to take over my life. And number three, the Machzer Vitri shares a very, very interesting perspective. He says, "Al tihi rasha b'fnei atzmecha." You will constantly look at yourself as a Rasha, as a negative person, if you are only in your own eyes. If you are, I think in today's modern lingo, we call this narcissism. If everything is about in your eyes, everything's about you, it's always looking at yourself, it's all about how will this make me look to other people, how will I feel, how will this make me be, and you're not sensitive to those around you, then certainly that is the beginning of the slip that is the beginning of the slipping and sliding down the slippery slope towards being a Rasha. If we can learn not just to be bifnei atzmecha, not just in our own eyes, but in other people's eyes. In other words, we look at other people, we're sensitive to them. How is this person feeling about what I'm saying? How is this person feeling about what I'm doing? How am I making a better place in the world around me? Then we ourselves will become better people, because indeed it will have a good effect upon ourselves. So these are three perspectives on the Al tihi rasha b'fnei atzmecha, don't be evil in your own eyes. With this, we'll conclude to be a Mensch, Chapter 2, Mishnah 13. Thank you all for joining us, and see you all next week at 11 a.m., both here on Zoom and live on Facebook.